Thank you, thank you. Welcome to the last session of today's program. My name is Alice Yu from the SLOCAT Partnership, and I'll be moderating today's session. I do think everybody would agree that today has been a very insightful experience, isn't it? We started with the forward-looking vision and horizon about the UN decade, about NDC 3.0, about the breakthrough to the avoid shift, transport, about the Hamburg Charter for sustainability. And then we talk about the actionable pathways. How do we achieve that? What are the resources and the templates and the data that is available provided by our partners in our community to do that? So it is great that we have listened to all of this, and now let's talk about money. Because we know that we cannot go anywhere without closing the financial gap, and we'll be hearing more about how big of it is. We know that there are opportunities emerging from COP29, as setting a new climate finance target is a critical priority for countries at COP29. We also know that this offers opportunity for us to scale up climate action in transport in a more reliable and a more structured way. So we have a great lineup of speakers and experts today from the field. I'll first pass the time to Felipe, Ramirez, Urban Mobility Director for the World Resources Institute, and he's going to tell us more about the current climate finance landscape for transport and recommendations to enhance how we can access in order to fill in the gap. Felipe.
Thank you so much, and thank you, of course, to CCG for the invitation. Thank you to High Volume Transport, who is the founder of this specific research that I'm going to present today. I'll try to be very quick. This is a large presentation, and I encourage you to use another QR code tonight to go through this paper that we're launching today. And I want to acknowledge Yichin, Molly, Valerie, Ben, and Keiji that actually are the authors of this document from WRI, and that we have been working with many other partners. In terms of climate finance, and it's very relevant, of course, during this COP, specifically because of the topic. I just want to say there are two things to highlight. And it's here I want to take off my hat of being part of an institution as WRI. And maybe going back to the moment I was a part of the government, and understanding that in terms of climate finance and in the global south, it is very difficult if we don't try to accomplish that to the short-term needs that the governments have to fulfill for people. And that's quite important when we want them to invest money in specific things as climate change, but having so many needs, especially in the global south. And we need to understand that, and we need to help governments in order to be able to make the right decisions in that sense. This is the source of climate finance that we have right now. So it has reached $1.3 trillion. Out of those $1.3 trillion, when we go to how it's going to for the sectors, we see in terms of transport that we are receiving $336 billion out of it. And of course, that's not enough when we think on how exactly it's going to our to the transport sector. Most of it is coming from private actors, but I want to highlight here something that I think is completely relevant. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think yes, that money is needed, and we don't need to reduce it, but we need to increase other money. Most of it is going from household individuals buying electric vehicles. That means that actually the efforts that we are doing in all these other things are still not enough, and we need to increase that amount of money. And this is actually what shows this, and it's showing not only how balanced it is, but also the lack of finance going to important things such as active mobility, nothing that I have to mention much here because we all know, but also in terms of public transportation. And again, don't get me wrong, I think this is great that we have this amount of money here, but the problem is that we need much more money, so this is rebalanced somehow, and that new money going to the right place, which is actually the active mobility and public transport sector that we have been talking so much. In terms of what we did during this report, the landscape of climate, review global databases on 13 climate funds, multilateral development banks, bonds, and private finance, collected data for 840 transport projects, did some case studies, 14 case studies to identify key barriers, and then some stakeholder consultations that are, some of you are here, of course. I don't want to repeat this since we don't have too much time. Some of the observations we saw is that most of the money is going for loans, some other for grants, but definitely most is coming here in terms of loans. We also think there is an opportunity to rebalance this and to think another new ways of finding the money and being able to have that money in the countries that are needed. Of course, not only talking about countries, but cities, and we have been talking about this, how we are able to give that money specifically to cities, to break those barriers that are preventing cities to get the money and be able to invest it. And in the same sense, I already mentioned this, but most of the things are going 70% to land transport, that's good, but most of it is going to road infrastructure, a little bit less to public infrastructure, and then we have e-mobility, active mobility, and freight. And definitely there we have much more work. I want to repeat this once more. It's not that we redistribute the same amount of money we have, it's how we put more money here, but a little bit more here, in this side of the table. Not that we reduce this one, we want this to keep as high as possible, but we need to put more money here too. And that's very important that we work together, and that's why I'm calling you that we have to go to work with the government and so on. Very quick, in terms of the observations also that we find, climate finance for transport should be high quality, aligned with avoid, cheap, and improve. I think we have mentioned this very much here during these conversations. Need for transparency within development finance to ensure measurable impact and contribution to adaptation. More climate finance is needed across the sectors and activities, regardless of the other things. And some of the barriers, lack of enabling policy and regulation. I think most of these are very obvious ones, but I think help us to understand where to focus when having a conversation we need to have as a community, not only, again, with the cities, governments, with the national governments, but also with the financial institutions that need to put the money here, and of course, to understand the developing world, how they should be putting money for all this climate finance. And let me also say something here very quick. The developing world should put money on this, of course, and should do a transition. But that just transition means that actually they should not push that hard their community that increase poverty. And this is very important. For me, coming from Colombia, I have to say, yes, the transition we are trying to do, it's important. But we are not willing to do the transition against our own people, making them poorer. That means that we need to think in a better way how exactly we do that transition. What exactly it means when we put the money in these kind of things, going the right way. And using, of course, unfortunately, the oil to make that transition possible. Here's a connection of the main barriers with areas of action. I already mentioned a little bit of this, how to connect with governments at the national and subnational level, how government donors and financial institutions should be also connecting and having a conversation, and how private financial entities and other partners should be part of this picture. As I already mentioned, not only households, as most of the money is right now being coming from the privates, but also how to put more money from other groups. And this is a great example of something that all of us know here. I just wanted to bring it, and it's part of the analysis in the paper. And it's the aggregated demand model in India. And I think it's important because this is a very good example on how to scale, how to use the same money for doing much more. And it's how, when analyzing and understanding that we can standardize the bus fleet and to make sure that different states with different policies, with different topics, start talking between each other, and we standardize that, we are able to build 5,450 buses across 5 cities in India, reduce the cost in 2023 to 27%. Again, talking about what I was mentioning before, how to make sure that that transition is just also for our people, that we don't make our people more poor, but at the same time we do the right transition, and to make sure that that standard technical and contractual terms can be held in time. So right now, India is actually moving for a bidding process of 7,000 electric buses, and in the future, short future, having 50,000 electric buses quite soon. I will stop there because of the sake of time, but again, I want you to please go for the QR, read the paper, make some comments to us. We will get excellent to have your observations on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Felipe. I really appreciate your point about it's not just that it's not enough, but it's that it's not balanced. And that example from the electric buses, I think, was a really great example to see how we can leverage climate finance to a better perspective. And speaking of that, then we can hear some success stories from Vietnam. We're going to have Mrs. Nguyen Phuong Hien, the Vice President of the Transport Development and Strategy Institute of the Ministry of Transport of Vietnam. She's going to tell us more about procuring electric buses in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, CCG UK, and the organizers who have given me a great chance to be here to share with you some progress. I would say some progress on the transitions of the bus to the public bus to the electrics, not yet success. So again, the message on the congestions and pollutions. So I just want to repeat here the message on the heavily congestions and seriously polluted in the two big mega cities in Vietnam currently. But for here, I'd like to say that from this, we see net zero is actually an opportunity for us to improve the public transport and to improve the air qualities in the big two cities in Vietnam. So to start with the transition, I'd like to bring in the pictures of the public transport in the two big cities of Vietnam, and this is the current situations. I'd like to focus on the buses. Now in Hanoi, so we got the network of more than 4,000 kilometers with almost 2,000 buses. And especially in Hanoi, so we got the first 10 lines of the e-buses with the almost 140 e-buses already running. In Ho Chi Minh cities, the network is less, just 2,400 kilometers with the 2,200 buses. Ho Chi Minh cities, we have 18 lines with the CNG buses already now running, and the first pilots electric buses in Ho Chi Minh City. So with that, we'll know that Vietnam had very strong commitment to the net zero by 2050 at the COP29. Then in 2022, the government has approved the national roadmap for the net zero, in which for the urban public transport, the government required the double, even more, a little bit more than double on the public transport side. So I think that we may be eligible for the championship already if we can realize these targets, and also got a really detailed roadmap for the transition to the green energy. It is not that for urban public transport is actually the first mode of transport that the government requires the mandate the obligations of the green energy transition right from next year. 2025. All of the new buses and taxis come to the market should be green energy, electric or green energies. So with the central government regulation, all of those local government now have been preparing the action plan for that. Hanoi actually approved the action plan. Ho Chi Minh City almost complete and expect to approve the action plan in December this year. So from the tentative action plans, we can say that the approach, there's a little bit difference in the approach between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. In Hanoi, based on the available resources, city resources and capacity, Hanoi plan to go with half and half. 50% green, 50% of the bus fleets are gonna be electrics and 50% still CNG buses. And with that, the Hanoi's green targets to 70 to 90% of the electric or CNG buses by the year 2030, and then by the year 2050, they expect to complete the targets. And Ho Chi Minh City is more ambitious. Ho Chi Minh City's go with the electrics for 100% of the new buses, and even for the existing lines, 18 CNG lines, then Ho Chi Minh City's still not the option for the whether they remain with the CNG or they go with the electrics. So with that targets, then Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City actually just got a really detailed plan for every year from now, from 2025 to 2030, and for Hanoi it's actually 2035. Plans for the green energy transition for the buses, bus fleets. With this, with the plan, that it will require quite a lot of the budgets from both the government and from the private sector. So buses operation in Vietnam actually subsidized for the operation. And then the government, the city governments continues the subsidized operation, even it's go for the electric buses. But from the difference in the approach, then Hanoi will support for the purchase of the both electrics and CNG buses in coming years, while Ho Chi Minh City just supports for the purchase of the electric buses and the charging station. So this is what the government can do and for the transition of the buses. But then the transition is still expensive for us. So we're now working with the two cities, trying to look for other methods to make the plans more doable. So similar to the case that India, that's our Colombia mentioned, that's we now working with the two cities, tries to gather our order together so that we can have a larger orders with the expectation of reduce of the price. And at the same time, so we also tries to design appropriate leasing model for the buses in Vietnam. You may heard that during the last month we've been, the manufacturer VinFast, the local electric manufacturer in Vietnam, just got acquired number of the orders and cooperations with the operator in taxi market in Vietnam. So the VinFast just offer all three model, operating, financing, and battery model, and they work quite well so with the e-taxi in Vietnam. So now we would like also to design an appropriate model for the electric buses. So with that, I'd like just to share with you and look forward for your advice so that we can really got the success in our plan implementation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nguyen. So now we'll turn over the time to Vivien Foster. She's the Principal Research Fellow from the Center of Environment Policy at the Imperial College London. She'll be talking about the Data to Deal initiative, Mark, we just heard earlier from the program, and the time is yours.
Thank you very much. This indeed is a sequel to Mark Howell's earlier presentation in which he explained about the Data to Deal framework, and he tantalized you with $10 billion of finance that were raised in a number of Latin American countries. What he omitted to mention is that with the notable exception of Costa Rica, almost all of this money went to the energy sector. And so what I would like to reflect upon is what would it take, or what additional challenges does this framework pose in the case of transportation? So we're going to revisit the 7 steps that you heard about earlier with a little bit of a reflection regarding what it means for transport. So if you recall, the first step was to secure high-level political support. Now, transport, it seems to me, presents an extraordinary degree of institutional complexity. And so gaining political consensus is that much more challenging. You have more ministerial boundaries that you need to collaborate across. And on top of that, you need to align multiple tiers of government with central, regional, and municipal government all playing major roles to differing degrees. In addition, there are perhaps a stronger vested interest from lobby groups. We've heard about the issue of workers and just transition, people who may lose out from switches. And on top of that, we also need to change the behavior of the general public in ways that may not be easy. We've just heard about cycling and walking and so on. So in terms of the politics, it seems significantly more challenging than energy, but nonetheless, you could see how you could start to try and bring these different political actors together. The step 2, if you recall, was around building institutional capacity. So given that we have many more institutions involved, there's many more types of capacity building that may be required to support Data to Deal in the transport sector. And we've also heard quite a bit today about the need for a comprehensive integrated data system to bring all of these different institutional actors together, with data often siloed in different locations, and the need for that data to cover really various different things, including the infrastructure, as well as the vehicles, as well as the travel behaviors of the general public. So again, another order of challenge in terms of building institutional capacity. When it comes to aligning with development objectives, clearly it's very important to ensure that decarbonization is supportive of growth. And Felipe said it very eloquently when he said, we're not going to do this by making our people poorer. I think that's exactly the point. And some of these concerns about, is building roads against decarbonization, I think is very, very problematic. We also have heard a lot about the potential for integrating social and environmental goals in the decarbonization pathway. And we heard about how congestion and air quality keep resurfacing as being incredibly important and perhaps more motivating for some of these policy measures than decarbonization per se. We've heard extensively about the need for alignment with NDCs and so on. As well as the need to align the decarbonization trajectory with energy. So clearly a very multifaceted alignment process required in the case of the transport sector. If we move on to the modeling stage, the stage of deliberative modeling, we find that for the transport sector, and this was a topic of last year's session, we lack a sort of centralized modeling tool that would enable us to cover all the different facets of the transport sector, although I think several institutions in this room are working on different components of that. But ideally, a modeling tool for transport would enable us to cover multiple travel modes, to integrate the energy and transport aspects, as well as incorporating behavioral shifts, diverse policy levers, and the social economic benefits of the transport transition. It's also important for modeling to recognize the role of both public and private sector actors, both of which are very important in this sector. Step 5 was the integration, the consultation and engagement with stakeholders. And here, as we've learned from the energy sector, having a modeling tool can be a very valuable way of building consensus and negotiating around conflicts of interest by trying to illustrate the trade-offs that are involved and trying to bring the different stakeholders together. So this, I think, is an important area where modeling could be helpful. Step 6 was around strengthening the policy and regulatory framework. Again, transport touches on many different aspects of policy, including emission standards, infrastructure regulations, the need for incentives in terms of prices and subsidies around the adoption of cleaner transport modalities, and also, of course, the importance of fiscal implications. We've heard about how the switch from internal combustion to electric vehicles may reduce very profitable gasoline taxes and add to very major electricity subsidy deficits that many sectors carry. And so the policy agenda, again, is quite extensive in the case of transportation. When we turn to the financing point, I think it's important to take transport plans and build integrated financing strategies around them. We've heard, though, that transport has struggled to access climate finance. One of the reasons for that, perhaps, is the fact that many of the projects, that there are large-scale infrastructure projects. We heard a lot about railways from the Honourable Minister, for example. But many of the investments required in transport are smaller and more decentralized. Many of them actually involve quite small-scale actors. Felipe, for example, highlighted the household sector and the important investments that they make in vehicles, as well as the private sector in commercial vehicles. Those investments are all part of the climate transition, but may not enter into the normal kind of conception of large decarbonization projects. So to conclude, we think that policymakers and supporting international organizations should consider following the data deal framework in the transport sector. But of course, it will need some significant adaptation and it will pose some greater challenges than it has in the case of energy. We think it's important for bankable projects, programs and supporting policies to be informed by stakeholder consultation, modeling tools, and aligned with the long-term development vision. We've seen how institutional coordination will be particularly critical and challenging for transport in view of the various divides between sectors, between multiple tiers of jurisdictions, multiple modalities, public and private, as well as freight versus passenger. But we do think that iterative decision-making founded by evidence and data-based modeling tools offers the promise of helping to align economic, financial, fiscal, social, and environmental objectives in a transport sector decarbonization pathway. And no presentation would be complete without a QR code. So we do have our policy brief on this topic and would encourage you to follow up if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vivien, for the QR codes. I'm going to bring my chair here because I'm afraid that our panelists are not going to see me. So, excellent presentations and great insights from hearing from our speakers. And now we would like to have a little panel discussions, and we also welcome the speakers from the previous scene setting session if you have anything else you want to share, hearing the questions. But joining with me today are Juman Kubba. She is the Just Transition and Sustainable Transport Advisor from the International Transport Workers Federation. We have Jamie again. He's sitting in the chair. He is the Transport Director from the Asian Development Bank. We have Nicolas. He is the Global Director for the Transport Sector in the Infrastructure Practice Group of the World Bank. And we also have Marco Yamaguchi here with us today, the Manager from the Transport and Logistic Division from the African Development Bank. So let's start with the lady, because the ITF has been following the negotiations very closely on finance. And I know you're nodding with a lot of exhaustion in you. Can you just tell us a little bit of your food for thought so far? Because we know that nothing is set in stone right now, isn't it? But is that offering any glimpse of hope for us in the transport sector? So for those that we all know about this, the parties over at the COP venue right now are trying to negotiate a new climate finance goal from 2025. 3 years of negotiations, we're supposed to be at the finishing line, we're not quite there. So we had gone into the COP process with a text that was 7 pages long. It was meant to be narrowed down from that, but it ballooned instead. And now the technical process of the subsidiary body has finished, which means that a new text, 25 pages long, lots and lots of square brackets, lots of options, is going over to the ministers to decide, and we have no idea what's going to happen. There's 2 things that could happen. Either they're going to make some pretty brutal decisions, some horse trading, and we'll end up with a text, or they can't agree. So what does that mean for us? So we have got we know that what's in the text now is it. There's not going to be anything added at this point. So the question is there stuff in there that's good? And if so, do we want to protect it? How do we help persuade our parties to try and make sure good language stays in? So going through the key points very quickly, because I know we've got not very much time. There is a big argument around timelines and contributor base, so who pays, which countries pay. I'm not going to go into that, we can discuss that later if you want. There's a question around quantum, so we've been hearing all day today about the amount of money needed from the Stern-Songway report. Our International Transport Workers Federation earlier this year did some analysis that showed that there's a 97% gap around mitigation of what we would deem sustainable transport. So a huge amount of money, we think, is needed for transport. But in terms of the negotiations and the text, we're still looking at a huge range of numbers. So anything from a floor of $100 billion a year to $1.3 trillion a year, huge gap. And within that, there's been a push by different actors for floors. So for the LDCs to have a particular amount protected, for the small island developing states having a particular amount protected. We don't yet know where it's going to land. What we do know is the current text does have references to, as Marushka talked about earlier, has references to the global stocktake. There are references to the NDCs and the NAPs. So we do want to make sure that stays in. So we're going to encourage as much as we can. Please keep that in, because that helps us make sure that we everything is translated and keeps in. The second point is the form of financing. So the 100 billion goal was around 40% core public finance. The rest was blended in other forms of private. For the NCQG, again, huge range of things being proposed, different proposals on public, private, blended, and the Global South understandably has raised lots of concerns around debt burden and also just concerns about whether blended finance can actually come through. There's also a lot of language around new forms of financing, including carbon financing on high emitting sectors, which would include aviation, maritime, so we need to just be aware of that and just see what comes through. And then one thing that we think is positive, there is language around qualitative areas. So initially there had been a debate about whether it would just be a number, quantum, but it looks now as though if there is going to be a text, it will include qualitative elements. We had been pushing for language around a sectoral platform. We haven't got that as such, but there is language around whole of government strategies to deliver on investment plans, platforms, and to support delivery of NDCs, NAPs, long-term low-emission development strategies. So again, that's something we want to keep, because that would be a way for the transport sector to have some kind of definite hook that we can tie to. There's also language around climate finance access at the national and subnational level. Again, super important for us. We need to make sure that stays. Well, to the extent we can, persuade them to do it. And then also positively, there's language around, a lot of language around just transitions. That was completely absent at the beginning. It's taken a lot of conversations and sort of learnings for just transitions to be included. But the current text does talk about supporting just transitions in carbon-intensive sectors, which would include us. It also talks about balanced allocation of adaptation and mitigation finance, and adequately addressing loss and damage, as well as recognizing the importance of just transition across sectors and thematic areas. I'm talking very fast, I know that, but just to give you a sense of what's in there. We are really strongly recommending that everyone in this room just encourages that we do have really strong language on transport, that we have strong language around funding for the transport sector, for all parts of the transport sector, and most crucially, what we really need to see is funding for a integrated model, so a sectoral platform that works across all transport modes and through which you can integrate concepts like just transition. So I'll hand over on that note. Sorry, it's a quick whirlwind.
It's a great overview. Thank you so much.
I mean, it's interesting to hear that among so many uncertainties that are still ongoing, that there are really opportunities for us to tap into it as a sector. Keeping our fingers crossed, really. But remember that NCQG isn't really the only financial announcement or pledges that we're seeing from COP this year, isn't it? Because I'm glad that we have 3 representatives from the MDBs here with us today, and I know the MDBs have been very busy, because also on the Finance Day that there was an announcement coming out from the MDBs that they have pledged $120 billion annually for climate finance for low and middle income countries. So I wanted to start with Nicolas. Can you tell us more about these targets and how the World Bank is embedding this pledge into their transport portfolio?
So thank you, Alice. The climate ambitions of the MDBs are embedded in multiple targets and policies, not just the one that was announced a couple of days ago. An important one is the Paris alignment. And since July 1st, 2023, the World Bank, like all the MDBs, is required to be Paris aligned. And what that means is that every single time we bring a new financing to our board of executive directors, it is required to be Paris aligned. And there is a specific methodology that has been developed both on mitigation and on adaptation. This is a very serious commitment. It's embedded in the joint MDB framework and in the World Bank Group Climate Action Plan that was developed for 2021 to 2025. So we do take all these commitments extremely seriously, and we also take our respective objective for climate finance very seriously. For the World Bank, we have a target of 45% of our total lending to bring climate co-benefits. And we have a second target, which is 50% of those climate co-benefits have to be related to adaptation. Now, what does it mean? This is globally for the whole World Bank. And we work in many different sectors. So what does it mean for transport? It means that we have to do more in transport, because sectors like human development, like education, like health, it's almost impossible for them to reach this level of targets. So other sectors like the big 3, energy, transport, and agriculture, which are the big contributors to GHG emissions, have to do more. And so we're expected to contribute more, which is only fair when you think that about a quarter of global GHG emissions, I mean energy-related global emissions, come from our sector. Now, transport decarbonization requires a holistic approach if we want to achieve those objectives, and this is why we are applying the Avoid, Shift, and Improve framework. There have been some discussion today about the framework, and I think there is a consensus in the transport community that this is the right way to frame how we can decarbonize our sector. Now let me come back to the MDB statement, because you've probably noted that the 120 billion pledge includes $42 billion for adaptation, and that there is also an objective to leverage $65 billion additional from the private sector. And I think that our sector is very well positioned to contribute to these 2 objectives. So let me start with the adaptation objective. So if we look at an organization like ours, over the past 5 years, the proportion of our climate co-benefits represented about 55% of our total volume of financing in transport. Our total portfolio is about $35 billion in transport. We do about 5 on average about $5 billion additional lending every year. And about half of this financing is adaptation related. So we are confident that we can on the adaptation side. And climate adaptation is very critical for a sector like transport, because transport infrastructure are particularly vulnerable to the effect of climate change. And there are a lot of things that can be done there to make transport infrastructure climate resilient. We need to develop and implement stronger road building standards, but also have a resilient network approach to ensure connectivity, even when some infrastructure are damaged. And we also need to secure enough resources for road maintenance. And this is very important because our research shows that on the African continent, the cost of road maintenance is going to triple in the coming decade as a result of climate change. Now, on the leveraging of private capital, we also think we are transport is well positioned. And let me give you just one very concrete example. We are financing the Dakar BRT, which entered in operation earlier this year. This was structured as a PPP, and it involved actually all the various entities of the World Bank Group. Also not only IDA, but also our colleagues from IFC, and there was also a guarantee from MIGA. And with these combined interventions, this project was able to leverage $144 million of private capital. So there are ways to mobilize private capital for transport decarbonization program. Now, we want to do more. One way to do that is through generating a robust pipeline of transport decarbonization initiative. This requires some seed financing, and this is why we created the Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, which is a new trust fund that was created in Glasgow at COP29 under the leadership of the UK. It's now financed by Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, and Austria. And we hope that we bring additional financing partners. But beyond the generation of a pipeline of some programs, we need a clear vision on how to get to net zero in the transport sector, and this is why the World Bank also developed these diagnostic instruments called the CCDRs, the country climate and development reports, which are comparing the various pathways to achieve the climate ambitions of specific countries in line with the Paris Agreement. And finally, I just want to say a few words about knowledge and capacity building, because this is very important. We need to disseminate best practices. There are a lot of innovation happening today in the transport sector, and we need to help developing countries navigate the decision trees, whether they should leapfrog and join the first movers, how they need to build the institutional capacity to transfer these innovations to their local context. And this is why we developed a new training program called the World Bank Academy, where we are currently focused on on urban transport, and the objective is really to train senior leaders from countries in the global south with the peer learning, mentoring, knowledge exchange. We've done a number of those sessions. We organized one session a couple of months ago with our colleagues from the Asian Development Bank in Seoul. So this is the type of initiative also that can help. So yeah, just to summarize, we are setting ambitious targets for ourselves, and we are adapting our financing, our knowledge, and our partnership to achieve those goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. This is a really great overview again, to really see how you're leveraging your positioning, in this greater financing landscape, and how MDBs are working together for this goal. I think what your response actually feeds into a lot about what I was going to ask Marco, because we wanted to ask particularly about attracting climate finance for climate resilience projects in transport. We know that natural disasters inflict about $8 billion annually to low and middle income countries just through the disruption of transport systems in these countries, and many of them are in Africa. So what is the African Development Bank doing in order to attract private capital for this?
Thank you, Alice. Yes, let me introduce some of our ongoing activity and maybe planned activity, both in adaptation the private sector, the angle. The first, starting from the adaptation space to attract the private sector. In 2021, our President Adesina, he advocated to mobilize a 25 billion adaptation finance in Africa, and in 5 years. So actually next year is last year, and actually we did it already. So we heavily, and then again, the same as Nicolas said, transport is always, the biggest contributor, and so our team is, really, ended our effort, and we already made it. But one of the success factor was of course still ongoing, but we have the strategic partner on adaptation space, which is called the GCI, Global Center on Adaptation, the NGO based in Rotterdam, and we have so close partnership with them, and then we have a complementary relationship. While FDB is the one who, at the end of the day, we finance, before the financing, we always invite now the GCA colleague to come over here, our infrastructure project, to conduct the climate risk assessment and vulnerability assessment, and then the identification of the adaptation component for us to be able to additionally finance on top of the normal cost of financing. So as I said, almost the same as Nicolas said, but on top of the 100%, the conventional type of financing amount, we are almost standardized to additionally invest 10% on the part of the adaptation space, thanks to our body of the GCA. So I always, at the early stage of the project, preparation stage, we always invite the GCA colleague and agreeing with the government to bring them in conducting this such quite important the activity. Actually, the one of the project that we worked with the Minister of Bundane the last year on Tanzania Burundi SGR. We did invite the GCA colleague to conduct the climate risk assessment, so that we did actually the added additional component. This is very important for private sector to be more comfortable to join us in the venture, the financing. That's number one. Also, from the adaptation, last COP28, last year COP28, we are the same as the President Adesina, that we signed the MOU with I think at that time it was 4 or 5 the donor countries to launch the innovative initiative, which is called the AGIA, the Alliance for the Green Infrastructure in Africa. Having the three the component. The one is the project preparation, and the second the project development, and then lastly the $10 million mobilization. So it's really focusing on the green infrastructure, and then again particularly focus on transport impact. So another the key component for us to attract the private sector is project preparation at the beginning. Not just give them money, but we work together, for them to be comfortable at the end of the day, for them to invest with us. So through the project preparation facility and also PD facility, we invite the private sector to join the joint effort to well prepared, high quality of the project, so that we can jointly invest. That's another the good successful the activity we are ongoing in adaptation space. Something similar. I totally agree with what Nicolas said on the road maintenance. We also just actually I myself as I'm leading this the very innovative. It's categorized as one of the banks the 4 or 5 very limited, and we call it the special initiatives. We have a limited money, but luckily enough that I got the support from the senior management, which is we call it the Sustainable Road Maintenance Program for Africa. The idea is to help our regional member country to reduce their big the fiscal burden for us to invest in the, we call it infratech solution, which contribute dramatically to reduce the maintenance cost. And so we did, so same as, with GCA and other colleagues, we do the vulnerability assessment in a selected country. As a phase one, we are selecting 6 countries across the continent, but first we do this national road, the vulnerability assessment, and then we identify the list of the infratech solutions, so that the government, and together with the government, we prioritize the selected the technology for us to be able to the proof of concept of the pilot before we go to the financing. So that's a technology side, and then the other side is financing. How we can bring the sustainable financing mechanism rather than the asking government to keep putting the fiscal the budget. That is not sustainable at all. So particularly in Africa. So we really want to work with private sector, in fact, through the model of the PPP. This is a PPP, but there are many different the structure required that we are trying to work with our the member countries. So this is sustainable. We have a lot of the traction from many the government in the regional member countries in Africa. So I already got funding for next year, the phase 2. So we are rolling out and for the next the 5 countries as well. But this is another example that we are working with the private sector in the future. Okay. Maybe I stop here. Yeah.
I think these are really great examples to see how we can further leverage financing into this. I'm seeing Holger, looking at me, and I know that we only have a few minutes left. I will have to keep the traffic going, but I wanted to turn to Jamie. And because, we've heard all these great things that MDBs are doing individually, collectively, and we know that the transport sector is really looking forward for the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport. So I wanted to just ask you to spill some tea about what the transport community is planning towards that decade, and how you can better align, ambition from the sector itself and fueling it with financial commitment.
Thanks, Alice. Yes, the decade is a great opportunity. I'll say 2 things. Maybe 3 things. One is on the infrastructure gap. So traditional type of funding and financing is essential. We saw those huge numbers globally and in our region in terms of rural access and urban access. So that will continue. But I think what we hope the decade will raise the profile is in broader system management requirements. I think it's been alluded to in terms of road maintenance requirements. Urban transport, how do we manage an urban system so it integrates from all those modes? Yes, we still need critical infrastructure investments. We need that big metro, we need the buses, we need the popular transport and non-motorized transport. And it's the co-benefit side. It's not just the chunks of infrastructure which are required, but how should we look at that in a much more holistic, integrated way? On the freight side, this is an area I've got real concerns about, because we're seeing growth at 4-5% per annum in Asian region, within Asia and beyond, but the investments are so far beneath that. There is a critical point where the demand for travel and movement of freights and goods will far exceed the capacity, and it was shown in COVID what sort of implications that can have. So again, realizing that there is going to be huge bottlenecks across the whole of the logistics chain and what implications that will have on the cost of transportation and where those costs end up, usually at the end user. I think it was mentioned in terms of not making anyone worse off, but the danger is, unless we significantly ramp up this investment in critical infrastructure, but in system operations, efficiency gains, and all across that, avoid, shift, improve. The real hope is that the decade triggers that, and we look at things in a very different way. One final point on the collaboration, and I think this session, this whole afternoon has been fantastic. Those QR codes showing that there is a set structure on those, and as Felipe mentioned at the beginning of this one, yes, we need the money, but we don't want to reduce that. existing money. We want to add additional pots of money into the other bits and pieces as well. If we move from infrastructure into a more system policy type, results-based lending, policy-based lending, then the collective actions of multilaterals, bilaterals, and using that as seed money to crowd in other forms of finance, climate finance, or private finance is essential. We can only do, as was described in that African example, we can only do one road maintenance program in a country. And yes, all of us can co-finance that and work together, but it is one program. It's not a section of road from kilometre 0 to kilometre 100 and then 100 to 200, which was the old model, which probably still is required for the infrastructure gap. But if we're looking at safe, resilient road asset management programs, if we're looking at the policies as were shown in the NDC and what sort of templates could be used, that requires collective, collaborative effort and support. Yes.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. That was excellent. Juman, if I could go back to you, what is the role of union in all of that? Because we did hear about, importance of financing infrastructure assets, and that has a people component to it. It has a sustainability component to it. But then, what is the role of union in this, and how do we make sure that transport workers, they're being protected in that transition?
Thank you. And yes, I think what we're talking about is a wholesale transformation of transport. We're looking at a new transport sector, and it's what unions were designed for. Unions were designed to protect workers and make sure that they are decent jobs, there are good working conditions, and that's never been more important. So what happened last year was that within the International Labour Organization, governments, employers, and unions came together to basically agree what just transition should look like, following on from previous work on just transition guidelines. The resolution last year restated the importance of just transition and stated that all financial flows, private and public, should be aligned to just transition. So our duty, all of us here, is to make sure that actually happens now as we look at all the different financial flows we're talking about. And so what we're looking at is just transition standards at every level of financing, from the NCQG to the MDBs to project level agreements. And what does that mean in practice? It means labour rights, it means social dialogue, including collective bargaining. It means impact assessments, including labour impact assessments, and mechanisms like just transition committees. It's really, really critical that workers are in from the outset, from the way projects are planned right through to how they're monitored and overseen. Because if we don't do that, we end up with a package that doesn't work for the people that are central to our transport systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insights. And with the time that I have, yes, I actually see a hand from Minister. I was supposed to go to you because I do want to ask. There's this big financial challenge and gap that we need to fill. We can always look at it half full or half empty, the glass. How do you feel about this? I'm sure you have a response to what you've heard, but also, do you feel confident that you're closing the gap for climate finance for transport in your country?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the submissions from our colleagues here. Just 2 or 3 things. One is that, as I said during my submission, unless we undertake an inclusive partnership whereby everyone is expecting to get back his money he's putting into that. Actually, we are talking climate change, but behind the scenes, we are talking about businesses. This is my takeaway, that there is no free money in this world. I think we all agree on this. Otherwise, the threats are there, we know them, floodings all over the world, and the money sitting in the bank, but you cannot get this money to address these issues, isn't it? So there is no free money. We should be smart enough on how we can get our issues fixed. We are from the transport sectors. We are coming from many countries, but all of these countries have not the same challenges. We are not at the same levels of development. A country that has already fixed its infrastructure needs, they need solutions. They need buses, but if you don't have roads, where will you put these buses? if you don't have the basic infrastructure, even if you buy those buses, because I've seen from the presentation, it is easy to get money to buy buses because you can easily pay back this money, isn't it? But if you need huge money to fix the solid railway infrastructure, then it becomes a headache. And yet, we are losing from our budget, burning money to buy fuel, fixing roads for some of our roads which cannot even stay there for 20 years. Actually, you build a road today, in the next 10 years, the road has gone because huge traffic is on the road. So now my takeaway actually from this conversation is that I need to go back, sit together with my people, come to some of you guys here in the room have seen the potential to build the synergies, skills, so that, aiming at how and what is the language that I can use to come to the financing institutions, tell them that I need this and I can get your money back. So I think this is very important that we are at different levels of development. There is no one size fits all solutions, isn't it? From the transport sector, we are still lagging behind in attracting this investment, but I think there is a lot we need to do in terms of convincing the financing institution, the climate finance to go really to the transport sector. And we are at different levels of development. So my suggestion, only one would be, let us work in a synergy. Because if you build and your neighbor destroys, the overall benefits will be zero or negative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think this really sums up our conversation very well today. Do we have any time for a question? Yeah. Yes, please, on the back. What? I think.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Hill. I'm from the International Office of the U.S. Department of Transportation. I just want to go back to Vivien's slide deck and also Felipe's, because it's interesting in the transport sector that we set NDCs at the national level, we fund all that land transport very high, and I'm thinking of Felipe's slide, and then we only really focus on delivering the hard infrastructure, and then all of those really fun, active mobility, land use. I was really taken by my colleague with the bike ped piece. Those all kind of sit out there for colleagues from the cities to do, and then we at the federal or national level, we sort of look away from it. And so I guess I would just like to ask the panel, barring any legislative fixes, like Minister, you could probably go back and become a Department of Transport and Mobility because you recommend it to your cabinet, but how do you work with those countries developing to bring that mobility piece into the national level conversation rather than just at the city level, so that they can fulfill those NDCs with the help of a partner at the national level?
Yeah, I was going to ask more on the evaluation, picking up on those two. Again, the decade will hopefully allow us to look at transport in a different way in terms of its benefits and where those finances or the return on those investments should come. If it's long distance freight, you're right, your neighbor, but that whole thing, if we're talking non-motorized transport, active mobility, what benefit does that have? It's not time saving, which is how transport evaluates its investments, which is why we build a lot of roads and hopefully some railways. But if we change the evaluation and the assessment criteria, which I hope the decade will allow us to, because the structure will say livable cities are important, regional connectivity is important, that will allow us to make very different investment decisions based on different criteria. Sorry, that's not the sort of national and local, but picking up on your point, why aren't we're investing in the infrastructure, not necessarily the active mobility and other forms?
Just to go back to one point around trying to do the sustainable transport master plans, because we think that could be a way it could sit with the NDCs and sit at the local level, brings the different forms of transport together, brings the resilience element and the mitigation element together, and helps allow kind of a collective approach that takes account of the fact that there are different issues, different countries, financing limitations, allows you to prioritize which financing needs to be prioritized when and what needs to be done at different levels. We think that's the kind of the heart of it that has to come through, and everything then links to that. I can't see another way, to be honest.
I will add something very, very quick. I think we have seen during the latest COPs a bit more of presence from cities, and I think that should be happening more and more. And the reason is because when you go to cities, you see that actually they are the ones executing. And that's great, and that's the way it should happen. So that connection, the links that should happen between actually NDVs, governments and cities should be completely aligned. And I think money should be flowing easier to cities so they can implement faster and easier. So we have to somehow get rid of some barriers that we have right now. And of course, I'm not saying everything should go just through cities, because nations are important and then the policies are made out there. But anyway, I think execution is happening in cities, and that's what we need to see right now, action. Where is that happening? So I definitely think that connection should be established in an easier, faster way.
Yes, but perhaps just to add that I think the work we do in the transport sector is shifting quite rapidly. 10 years ago, and I probably Marco and Jimmy will say the same thing. I mean, MDBs were essentially focusing on building hard infrastructure. What happened now with the climate agenda is that we are getting more and more into services. And this is new territory, requires new skills, new instruments, and we are trying to adapt. But the shift is already quite advanced. On e-mobility right now at the World Bank, we work in about 40 countries, and every day there are more cities, countries that are approaching us to get support on this. We started to work on green shipping. Active mobility is moving fast. Now every time we start working on an urban transport program, the question about, well, why don't you add some back lanes to get even greater results comes, and the momentum is clearly growing, and the economic rationale is there. We did a study on the economics of e-mobility in almost all the developing countries that we researched. When you monetize all the benefits, the case for electric buses and electric 2- and 3-wheelers is overwhelming. And it's the same for active mobility. Actually, during this COP, we are going to release a new modeling instrument that looked at the economic benefits of back lanes, and same thing in the economic case is there. Now, it doesn't mean that we should forget the hard infrastructure. I mean, we have to do both, actually. We have to work on services, and we have to keep working on connectivity, because, the basic things that we thought that we had fixed 20 years ago, like securing road maintenance, are not achieved, and in fact they are going backward, because now that the cost of road maintenance is increasing, and that with the electrification, many of those road maintenance funds are financed by a gasoline tax. No? So as you electrify, you're going to get less revenues, and so all these topics are still very much there, and it's the sector is becoming more and more complex, but that's why it's interesting to be working in transport at this time. No?
Thank you. So, yes, Carolina and then Sophie.
Hi everyone.
Very quickly.
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I was wondering, in a slightly different sense, about financing. And just to give an example, I know that we talk about cities and the role they have in this transition, that there are many value capturing instruments that cities could be put in place, and maybe not only by cities, but maybe in supply chains or other kind of environments. And I wonder if that could be actually a thing to increase financing for not only sustaining the services or the transport systems, but also to expanding these kind of new models that we have, or how we can maybe put in place operation models that could create new revenues for continuing scaling up the financing. That I haven't seen yet to talk about that in a way that could maybe move the needle and increase the share for that kind of climate financing.
So can we quickly hear your question so that perhaps we can potentially bundle the answers, and then.
My question is about the elephant in the room. Can people raise hands if you're from a company? One. Okay. My question is, if 85%, which I heard yesterday, of the finance needs to come from the private sector, we talk about PPPs and blended finance, how are we going to leverage companies to join this? Because they seem to be absent from this room and absent from the discussion. And unless we get companies to not see transport as something that gets their staff from A to B, or something that moves their goods from A to B, and it's a cost center, it's something that's there for them, but they don't feel any ownership of it, exceptions noted. I think we have a problem. So I would like to ask, how do we make sure that we leverage private sector companies, whether logistics, whether shippers, others, to co-invest in a sustainable transport system? Thanks.
I'll be very quick on the private sector. The vast majority of our e-vehicle work is our private sector clients. The sovereign side is, it's rail, but separate rail for the moment, metros and heavy rail. It's only really in buses where they may not be as financially viable, because we're looking at reform and different franchising mechanisms to provide that service. What we have found is where our private sector are investing in private entity and companies, in e-vehicles or in charging infrastructure, it's where there is a very strong policy. The strong policy de-risks individuals purchasing an e-vehicle, in a fleet operator purchasing e-vehicles. So the policy is very important for private sector investments. The slide showed exactly where the vast majority of e-vehicles will be purchased and operated, and it's in private sector or fleet management. But they have to set that policy to make sure that they know what the future's like and they will move in that direction. Thanks.
Well, your question is quite difficult. I will just talk from my experience when I was in Transmilenio and in the Secretary of Mobility in Bogota. I think there are opportunities to capture value. It's extremely difficult, and in the cities, we don't really know how to exactly do it. And there are cities like Hong Kong that are very good on doing that. The problem is, I think there are two different conversations. This one, it's completely different. Of course, that amount of money in terms of capturing value is much less, and it's per city. But definitely there should be some capacity building that probably this community can try to do, so cities learn how to do it, because it's absolutely not being done right now. And I think there is a specific good moment to do it, specifically for the public transport system, because the public transport generates demand, and we are not capturing that value because of the demand that the public transport system generates. That land value should be reinvested in the public transport system, and that should be obvious for cities. But again, I tried. I created a department in Transmilenio. It's so difficult to accomplish. The metro in Bogota right now is trying to do that. I think they are doing great. Some of the buildings they are doing are part of that value capturing, but still it's peanuts again compared to the needs that the city has. So I think I'm not answering completely the question, but that actually shows that we should do more research on that probably and help cities on that, because I think there is something and there is more money for sure that we can bring to the table.
Literally 2 seconds. So just to turn that on its head, I think the flip side of failing to invest, and it's obvious, but we do need to restate it, is if we don't invest in the systems that we need, we end up with increased loss and damage. And we're already seeing the cost of that. We're seeing the cost of that in terms of infrastructure being destroyed, supply chains being wrecked, people's lives being lost. And I think we haven't done enough collectively to unpick what that looks like and make that case for why we need this investment, because the political backlash of failing to get this right is part of it. Also just the cost to lives and the cost to our future. So it is important that we start bringing that into the conversation more front and center. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause to our speakers today? I'm sure we can continue this discussion later on at the reception. But for now, I'll turn over the time back to Holger. Thank you.
So we'll keep that also very short. Thank you so much also to the speakers, but also to the partners from the Asian Development Bank, from SLOCAT, the High Volume Transport Program, and GSZ and World Resources Institute. Really also with others, so strong partnerships also and whatnot. happening here. Thanks also to the dear colleagues, also Vivien Foster, Mark Howells, but also Carla Canone, as well as also our comms team also online. Thanks also for joining. I got actually quite a lot of messages that there's people were watching, so that's great. But also you will also have the whole streamers online. If you missed any part, we will also provide all the slides, so watch out, we will share also that. And finally, I must say I'm now going to COPs for about 20 years, and always also, and we still see also the emissions are still rising, but at the same time, I think we are now in the transport sector at a stage where we can now accelerate. We also have the tools, we have the solutions, we have the right financiers in place, probably not enough, but also like we're getting there. We have champions also in the countries. We have the international institutions, so like ITF and many others are really also driving that. We have the unions here. So I think we're now at a point where we say, well, yes, we also were not particularly successful to also get also to the peak by now, but now also I think it's a time also where we hopefully see also in the next days that we can also really also push and accelerate. And with that also, thanks again. I think we all deserve also one or more drinks, and wish you a successful COP, and I'm sure we'll see each other around also during the next days. Thank you very much.